Hey there guys, I'm Will and welcome to FP1. Now if you were to make a list of the most successful Formula 1 drivers of all time, or even just the last decade, I feel like a persistent name on there would be Sebastian Vettel. But what if he never entered the sport in the first place? How might Formula 1 look today if Vettel didn't have his influence on it? That's what I'm here to discuss today, and I've got a really special guest with me as well. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Josh Revell. Josh, thank you for coming on the show. How are you? And I guess it's quite a topical video at the moment with Sebastian Vettel and what's happening with him and his Ferrari contract. Did you think it was time for him to leave Ferrari, or could he have done with a couple more years?
I think it was time for Ferrari to make a decision themselves whether or not Vettel wanted any part of it. So it's a very, at some point, Vettel was going to leave. He wasn't going to be there forever. I think the way it happened was completely out of the blue. I think we would have been more expecting this toward the end of the year. But nevertheless, it's now thrown an interesting dynamic now as to what Ferrari are going to do for the rest of the season. And, of course, where Vettel's going to go from here.
Yeah, they're supposedly options at Renault. I personally think he's going to retire. I don't think he'll kind of move into a lower down team like, say, Kimi has in the past. Do you think there's any other seats on the grid for him, or is this it for Seb?
I think really, unless Toto Wolff wants to open up a door really for Vettel to come in, there's not going to be much desire for him to go into a team which is not at the forefront of the grid. So we know that the Ferraris are obviously, it's not an option because he's not going to be there anymore. Mercedes is unlikely because Hamilton most probably is not going to go, and Bottas is a very suitable wingman. And of course, Red Bull are not going to take him back either because they've got a very suitable lineup. So beyond that, obviously McLaren's still done, and Renault. The big problem for Renault right now is that they've been run by an overly emotional potato by the name of Cyril Abiteboul, and he'll continue to drag the team down for as long as he's in that role. And they're not really performing as well as they should be. There's not a lot of options for him, so unless he's willing to settle for a midfield team, I can't see him on the grid next year, unfortunately.
Yeah, I guess it's a shame as well because he has become quite a character, I think, in the Formula 1 world since his move to Ferrari, and I guess since he's also started winning, I kind of started liking him more, I think, after his title-winning years at Red Bull. But I'm going to take you back to 2007, and obviously Sebastian Vettel's debut in the Sauber, I think it was at the USGP that year, but we're going to forget that happened. And firstly, we're going to have a look at the Toro Rosso seats. Into 2008, we know they had Scott Speed and Antonio Liuzzi in 2007. That then changed completely into 2008 with Vettel and Sebastian Bourdais. Now, let's say Bourdais still gets that seat, do you think they would have kept Scott Speed or Tony Liuzzi into 2008, or do you think there could be another driver that they could have put into the mix there?
Because Liuzzi was part of the Red Bull lineup for a while, and he actually was part of the original Red Bull lineup. And then he was the first of all to be demoted to Toro Rosso. Fun fact. Of course, Marco has had a complete hard-on for that musical chairs bout. And Scott Speed, he's actually someone I'm going to be covering in the future. He's an interesting character. He really, really is. He's a fast bloke. He was the first winner of the Red Bull driver search in America. He won titles in junior formula in Europe, but there are some drivers when they get into Formula One, they just can't replicate that success. And I think part of that problem was that Scott Speed was arguably dumber than a box of rocks, and that all came to a head at the European Grand Prix in 2007, where he had a bloody bust up with Franz Tost, and then during the week he had a blow up on his newsletter, and before you know it, he's all gone. So I don't think really the Scott Speed thing would have been any other option. In regards to who could have filled the void, I mean, they had Christian Klein already was in the Red Bull seat. I'm not so good with memory in regards to who could have potentially replaced him at that time, but I suppose, they would have almost certainly gotten someone to fill the void until then, potentially even bought him Bordet early, and kept Liuzzi. But, it's funny how history plays out, really.
Yeah, I guess the other thing to maybe chuck into the hat there, Jacques Villeneuve, he was obviously dropped by Sauber, I think it was halfway through 2006, so he's still kind of fresh in there. Maybe Montoya might have been floating around the F1 world at that time. He hadn't been out of the sport for too long. Do you think either of them could be options, or would they be out of the question at that point?
Is this for Sauber or Toro Rosso?
For, I guess both, really.
Well, for Sauber, the options are more broad, much more broad than that of Toro Rosso. Having said that, Bordet was fresh out of winning Champ Car, But yeah, for Sauber, they definitely would have had a lot of options to replace Villeneuve. But, obviously Red Bull viewed Vettel as quite a special talent, and they did the same thing as what they did with Ricciardo. They just put them in with a lizard team until they actually had a space vacant in their own one. But yeah, it's difficult to... I can't, off the top of my head, I can't actually remember who was and who wasn't on the grid in 2007 at that time, but I'm sure there would have been a few drivers who would have been able to step up to the role at Sauber. They would not have been hard-pressed to fill the void had Vettel not been there at all.
Yeah, and I guess it was a good year for Sauber as well. 2007, I think, was that the year they won... Or it was the year after, I think they won...
It was 2008 where Kubica won at the Canadian Grand Prix, but 2007 was still a decent year. It wasn't absolutely massively good, but it was still it was better than some of the more recent years where they were down the back of the grid with cars that were run on a shoestring budget. So yeah, really, it's it was a half decent car back in 2007. Not brilliant, but something that an experienced driver could have done something okay with, basically.
Yeah. Let's jump a few years ahead then. We'll go to 2009. Now, we know David Coulthard left Red Bull, retired from the sport in 2008. I feel like part of that was maybe the pressure that Red Bull were putting on getting a young driver stepping up, and that young driver would have been Vettel. But imagine that he's out of the question. Could Coulthard stay on another year into 2009? And that would have been interesting as well, seeing him in a much faster car again for the first time. Or could we have seen Red Bull go for somebody else? What would your opinion be on that one?
I think that is more down a question of what Coulthard wanted to do at the time. I'm cheating and I'm bringing up the juniors that they had back in that time. So they had Jaime Alguersuari, who won the British F3 Championship in 2008. Now, a jump to Red Bull would have been too much. They probably would have brought up Sebastian Vettel to partner Mark Webber. They also had Brendan Hartley, who, with the greatest respect, probably should not have been in Formula One. And to think back then, he was not very good either. So realistically, they would have gone for either Alguersuari or Sebastian Buemi, and they did eventually bring them up to Toro Rosso. But obviously, with Vettel not being there, with Coulthard retiring, and again, I just couldn't see Coulthard going for another year, really. So they probably would have bumped Bordet up to that second role. And really, I'm not sure whether or not that would have been a hindrance to the team or a benefit, because I really don't think Bordet was that great in Formula One, with all due respect. And so, with the constant sort of back and forth going on between Webber and Vettel in 2010, with that out of the way, Webber could have had more of an upper hand, less hassle in the 2010 season, and potentially had a better shot at the title. I don't know. It's all hypothetical, really. There's so many different ways that this could have played out had one little German not entered the Formula One championship.
Yeah, exactly. I think 2009, again, I'm not sure. I think Bourdais might have been the one that they brought up. I guess bear in mind he would have, like you said, there's several ways this could have played out, but he would have been very good in that Italian GP, at least qualifying. I think he stalled on the grid, didn't he, on the actual race?
Yeah, he actually qualified third. I think he was third on the grid. Then he stalled. But like again, that kind of sums up his career, really.
Yeah, I guess maybe as you said, could have been a bit of a hindrance or a benefit in 2009, 2010. We don't know, but at the end of 2009, you had Kimi Raikkonen that was effectively booted out of Ferrari, and he went out and did some rallying for a few years. Now, that rallying, as far as I'm aware, was sponsored at least partly by Red Bull, and we know Red Bull also attempted to contact Raikkonen in 2014 when Vettel was going to leave that team. Obviously, they settled with Ricciardo in the end, and that was a pretty good decision for them, I think. But could Raikkonen have maybe been an option for them in 2010? Let's say Bourdais doesn't work out, and Raikkonen hasn't got a seat for the 2010 season. Could we've seen him with Webber in that Red Bull? That would have been an interesting lineup.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, had that been a driver lineup, you would have to say that they would have definitely been the dominant force all season. I don't think it would have been extremely different to how it's played out in reality, but because of course, Vettel was a bloody fantastic driver. I mean, as is Raikkonen. It's still more a matter of down to the tomfoolery that we saw in Turkey, for example, not happening. Because Raikkonen doesn't pull that stuff off. So if Raikkonen did get into the team, it definitely would have made things a lot easier for Red Bull. For absolutely sure. But yeah, again, I think, I don't know. We hear reports all the time about outsider drivers being contacted by Red Bull and what forth. But you got to sort of take that with a bit of a grain of salt, really. It's like, okay, is Helmut Marko really contacting these guys and really seriously considering them for the role? I mean, yes, of course, there was Red Bull backing that Kimi Raikkonen had during that time, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he's got links to the Formula One team. Like, I'll give you an example. Nick Cassidy, who I've covered before, has got Red Bull backing in Japan. He's got Red Bull plastered all over his Super GT car. He's got Red Bull plastered all over his helmet, but he's got no ties to the junior program, and he's got no ties to either Formula One team. He does have ties to McLaren, but nothing to Red Bull. Yet, of course, he's got all that backing behind him. So it's not necessarily, when you have a look at all that, it doesn't necessarily mean, Red Bull want me. I mean, Red Bull just sponsor a lot of sports personnel. Nevertheless, if they were seriously considering it, and if Raikkonen did take it up, it without a doubt, Raikkonen would have been in with a shot for the title. And I think, given everything, probably would have been not a shoo-in, but a very solid bet to take the title.
Yeah, and this was Kimi at his best as well. It was, I think he maybe began to tail off towards the, I guess 2015, maybe 2014, that sort of season when he rejoined Ferrari. But back 2010, he was at his best. He managed to take that 2009 Ferrari, which was a dog of a car, to the win in, I think it was Spa, I think it was that year. And so he as you said, he really could have been an option there. Now, we're going to move on to those championships now. As we know, in real life, Vettel won the 4 championships from 2010 to 2013. Again, as you touched on, you can't... There's no way to predict how these championships would have gone without Vettel in them, because so many things could have been different. Qualifying positions would have been different. So what I've done is I've just removed Vettel from the results and then adjusted the point scoring positions accordingly. Now, it's really interesting because in the actual 2010 championship, the top 3 was Vettel, Alonso, Webber. Yet when you remove Vettel's points in his scorings from that table, Webber actually jumps up to the lead, and Webber would have taken the championship by 14 points. So 278 points for Webber, 264 for Alonso. again, if you remove their collision in Turkey, which is the only one I did this for, I'm sure there's other instances, and you could have done this with Alonso as well, I'm sure. If you remove that incident in Turkey, you end up with Vettel getting an extra, or Webber, sorry, getting an extra 10 points, so 288 to Alonso's 264. So it's quite interesting. We would have seen Webber as a world champion, and would that have affected the rest of his career, do you think, if he'd won that 2010 championship? As we know, kind of 2011 he was still sort of there, 2012, 2013 was when he kind of fall off, unfortunately. Could we have seen Webber in the sport for a little bit longer if he was a world champion?
I mean, like he could have easily won it, even with Vettel there, had he not spun in Korea. It's just every little bit sort of makes a difference, really. If he won the 2010 championship, could he? You see, that's the thing. He would have been the number one driver going forward from 2010 after that victory, supposed victory. And that from then on, after 2010, right and through to 2013, the damn car got better. It just got more and more dominant, especially in 2013, where it was just a joke with how dominant it was. It's like, and they're off. It's like, okay, cool, sweet, Vettel's won. I'm done. I'm out of here. So it, with Webber being in the number one spot with the cars that they were getting, you're not just talking about a potential 2010 championship here. You also got to consider here that he would have been in the fray for, a few more championships, and with less of the rubbish that was going on with the inter-team sort of rivalry that was pretty evident. And was it Malaysia 2013 Multi 21?
Yep, that makes me cry to this day. We were watching that live and just been in tears. Like, no.
Yep. German kid upsets Hugh Jackman lookalike. So it really was. It was getting quite frosty, especially toward the end of the 10 year. So you remove that and you give Webber the reins. And if he won that 2013 championship, let's say, I don't think he would have been hanging up his hat at the end of it, especially considering he was still racing toward the end of it.
Yeah, because he was off at Toyota, wasn't he?
Considering he retired full time, just a couple of years later, he probably didn't have that much more in the tank. I think really, when a driver considers himself done, he's done. Like Rosberg, once he won that 2016 championship, it was like, okay, I'm done. Really? But yeah, I got what I want. There are drivers out there that just think that way. They don't need to go out and break records. To them, if they hang up their hat, then that's what they want to do. So maybe we could have seen Webber in the championship for a couple more years, but even after winning the World Endurance Championship for two times, he still hung up his hat shortly thereafter. So
yeah, and I guess Webber was apparently in the line for a Ferrari seat in 2014. So
everyone's in line for a Ferrari seat. Maldonado said that he was approached.
That is very true. I think I was reading Webber's autobiography, and he was saying that Eccleston was deliberately trying to push him to stay in the sport and keep that Ferrari and keep going and try to get him into Ferrari to replace, I think, Massa at the time. Which, again, would have been interesting. Obviously, that's going into the 2014 season, which we know for Ferrari wasn't one of their best. So I feel had he ended up there, I don't think Ferrari would have retained him. That's just my view. If we go back then, 2010 we've done. 2011, it's a little bit more straightforward. Jenson Button was the main, I guess, title rival for Vettel, although, again, if you look at the results, Vettel just runs away with it. But, again, if you remove Vettel's results, it would have made Button the two-time world champion, which is, again, interesting. I don't think that would have affected his career as much. He stayed with McLaren anyway, going through to when he finally hung up his helmet, I think, at the end of 2016 or 2017, if you count his Monaco race that year. And then 2012, 2013, again, a little bit more straightforward. Alonso was the main title rival those years, and he would have kept the title had Vettel been taken off the standings. And Alonso, 4-time world champion with Ferrari, that's maybe the more interesting one. how could that have affected his career if he was a 4-time world champion? Would he have stayed with Ferrari? Would he have kept that belief that he had when he joined the team in 2010?
Well, I mean, like, yeah, you'd have to say so. It would have cemented his legacy as one of the greatest drivers of all time, as if that's not already put into the minds of a lot of people. 4-time world champion is something special. Few have achieved that. And especially for him to do it in the cars that he would have, supposedly. He was damn close to doing it in 2012. And especially given the car he had, to almost pull it off was remarkable, even for someone who thinks that his ego is absolutely... but, hey, I give credit where credit's due, but I'll also point out their flaws. Hence why my channel is so polarizing. Anyway, so, I think really, had Alonso become a 4-time world champion, especially with Ferrari, there would have been no incentive to move to McLaren, even with the Honda engine, promising what forth. Because the McLaren-Honda partnership was all just a wet dream perpetrated through past success with Senna and Prost. So it's like, well, you remember, Honda was in the game for a little bit before all that McLaren MP44 stuff. And of course, they came in, and I'm seriously under the impression that McLaren and Honda were not cooperating with each other, which is what you need to do, especially when you're trying to develop an engine, and especially Alonso's comments just absolutely did not help. When the going gets tough, unfortunately, you need an effective leader who's, he's going to make the suggestions, but he's not going to totally just polarize the damn team, which is unfortunately what he did at McLaren, in my opinion. And so with Ferrari then, 2014, the car wasn't very good, but with Vettel taken out of the fray and given where he would have finished and future prospects for the team, it's very difficult, again, whether or not he would have stayed, whether there would have been the intention to stay there. I mean, and put it this way, 2006 Renault. What would make you think that changing teams was a necessity? You just come from 2 years of winning the world championship. Why would you want to move?
That's a good point.
It's all about fulfilling a challenge. And of course, Alonso said there was unfinished business at McLaren. Well, hey, in the sequel, there's still unfinished business. Hopefully he rounds out the trilogy, but of course that's not going to happen anytime soon since we got the comedy club with Norris and Ricciardo in there for 2021. But yeah, apparently he signed a deal in 2021 for Renault. God forbid. I'll tell you what, Cyril Beatbull and Fernando Alonso, that's going to be more toxic than the elephant's foot in Pripyat. But yeah, I'm getting off track. So, yeah. Overall, I think, would have been pretty difficult to determine whether or not he would have stayed with Ferrari, but it definitely would have been more of a possibility had he won 2 more championships.
Yeah, I guess that kind of brings us on to our last point. So, obviously, Alonso leaves Ferrari at the end of 2014, and that's that kind of trigger that allows them to sign a Vettel into that team until, obviously, last week, as we know. Let's say Alonso still goes to McLaren. Who do you think might have been in that Ferrari now if Vettel wasn't in the picture? What are the drivers? And this is a really interesting one because there was, as you said, everybody has been in link with Ferrari in the last few years. So, what drivers do you think we could have seen there?
Well, Raikkonen would have been there, for sure. I seriously doubt they would have retained Massa, but, stranger things have happened. And when I say retained Massa, I mean re-signed Massa.
Yeah,
because of course he was at Williams. But that would have been a possibility because he's had prior experience with the team, and they probably would have viewed Raikkonen as a number 1 driver and blah blah blah. And of course, that partnership was there in 2007 and 2008. So in 2009. So there's experience there with that partnership specifically. Other candidates at the time, Hulkenberg was touted, but he's always been touted. But of course, Ferrari probably would have won podiums. Perez was, I think he was, because he was part of the Ferrari Driver Academy, if I'm correct in saying that.
Mm-hmm.
The McLaren stint scarred him, and of course now he's worked his way into a position where it's just like it's irrefutable how good he is, at the very least in race pace. Beyond that, Ferrari don't really bring in their academy drivers. And I mean, like, the closest person that people say is to a Ferrari Driver Academy driver nowadays is Charles Leclerc and Antonio Giovinazzi, and Giovinazzi wasn't part of the academy. So that gives you an idea just how much they don't really harbour their drivers too much, as opposed to Red Bull. So again, like 2015, and again that was actually probably, what was at the time where Maldonado said that he was approached? I'm not sure.
I think it was 2013. I think it was. I think because that was after he had his best season in F1, best for Maldonado anyway in 2012. So I was gonna throw Maldonado's name in there, but I guess also it had that quite awful year in 2014 with Lotus, and maybe that might have taken the shine off him a little bit. You've basically taken all the names that I was going to suggest, but I think the last one, yes, you could throw in there. Maybe Kayumi Kobayashi. Again, he'd kind of been stuck with Caterham, and I think he'd fallen out with that team through 2014 as well. But go back to 2012, 2013, he was quick, and he got at least one podium, wasn't it, at Japan? I think 2012.
Yeah. The problem I have with... this is the problem I got with... I sometimes ponder... why the hell Japanese drivers are not as successful in Formula 1 as what they probably should be? Because if you look at some of the talent they've had, you look at it and you just go, how are there not more podiums? How are there no wins? Because we know that the Japanese have some very good drivers, but you look at the ones they send to Formula 1, it's the ones that are quick, but it's also the ones that are complete loose cannons. And, Satoshi Motoyama, like, he was someone that definitely should have been thrown into the fray. Nowadays, we've got oh my god, how do I not remember his name now? Naoki Yamamoto. For some reason, they're not sending the best, not necessarily the best, but the same ones, basically. The problem with Kobayashi, he was irrefutably fast. Even against Perez in 2000 and 2012. It was 2012, where Perez had that stellar year with Sauber. But Kobayashi still, he had his moments, but he also had his moments, like a la very stupid mistakes in Watford. I don't think Ferrari would have really wanted to digest a year of some somewhat erratic driving. If they wanted that, they just would have hired an Italian. So... I'm not sure whether or not Kobayashi would have been a serious thought, especially given the other candidates that they could have had. I think Hulkenberg would have probably been more of a consideration at that time. It's really difficult to think off the top of my head to think of who were the other options at the time, because sometimes, some of these decisions just come out of freaking nowhere. Hell, if for some reason Hamilton wanted to, he probably could have opted out of the Mercedes contract and just gone, okay, well, there's a spot open at Ferrari. See you later. I don't know why I would have thought that after winning the World Championship, but I mean, hey, it's a possibility.
I guess the other option maybe then is, and you had to go a little bit further back, but perhaps Max Verstappen at the end of 2015. He was still at Toro Rosso. If Ferrari had a spot, that might just be enough to lure him before, obviously, Red Bull snapped him up halfway through 2016 to replace Kvyat. And I'd say maybe at that point, it makes sense why Red Bull snapped up so quickly, just in case something like that didn't happen. But could Verstappen really have been a realistic option for the Scuderia?
There was someone around that time in the Ferrari Driver Academy, about the same age, with the same experience, doing the same things, that Ferrari could have brought up if they wanted to. Lance Stroll. Because, of course, he was part of the Ferrari Driver Academy after he won the Canadian Karting Championship, and he held on to it right up until his last F3 season, and then he went to Williams. He was always the option. But, of course, I think he was too young back then. I mean, good God, Verstappen was 16 when he was in the damn Formula One car.
That's mental.
Just crazy, really, how early they got him in there. But having said that, he's a crazy talent. I think Red Bull had a real strong hold on him. It would have been... Ferrari would have had to dig deep in their pockets and dig deep into the will to... Because they rarely, very rarely, bring in a young talent. I mean, Charles Leclerc, even that, like what they did is unusual. And he had already been in Formula One for a year. The only time I've seen Ferrari, well, not seen, obviously, but, the only time they've really taken on board a young driver and put him into the team with no prior F1 experience is Ricardo Rodriguez in 1961 when he was 20 years old. 19 years old. It just doesn't happen. Because, of course, it's the holy grail of motor racing seats, a Ferrari Formula One seat. And this isn't like back in the 50s or 60s where there were like 5 seats, and if you wanted one, all you got to do is just wait a couple of rounds for one of them to die, and then you can go in there if you wanted to. Nowadays it's just the 2 seats, and one will probably come available every like 4 or 5 years, and it's the most hotly contested seat on the grid. And they're not just going to pluck a rookie out of nowhere with no prior experience unless he's absolutely, irrefutably a future great. So I'm not convinced that Verstappen would have been a serious candidate for the role. I don't think Ferrari would have, especially off the back of a 2014 season that they had, luring in a driver still, well into his teens, unproven in Formula One, and meant to be one of the drivers leading the team back to redemption. Probably not going to happen.
Yeah, and I think just this whole conversation with it's just showed how different Formula One would have been, and you make a good point about Verstappen, and I think also at that point he hadn't really shown his full talent. He'd made a bit of a dog's dinner of parts of 2015. He had some silly accident, say Monaco, I think one that kind of comes to mind, with I think it was Grosjean where he ran into the back of him. But
yep,
yeah, it's fascinating really having these kind of conversations. And Josh, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It's been brilliant. Have you got any other lasting comments that you just want to add?
Yep, Renault, fire Cyril right now. And Formula One, get rid of the Sochi Ultradrome. No one likes it. No sane person likes it. And anyone that does is either being held at gunpoint or is lying. I got strong feelings about those two.
Really, I can't tell.
Really?
Sochi, no. Sochi, I can. The only reason I like it is because it's the only race I can win on the F1 game because it's corner cut central. But yeah, well.
In fairness, there's not much more that Herman Tilke could have done with that track. I mean, there's only so much that you can do with about 500 square miles of Russian car parking. So
yeah, and obviously with all the stadiums as well, they've got to kind of work their way around that. It's yeah. Cool. So, Josh, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on. And yeah, it was a really good chat with you. We can maybe do this again sometime. Obviously, Josh's channel will be down in the description below, so make sure you give that a subscribe as well. Makes some fantastic content on some F1 drivers past and present. Let me know down in the comments below what you guys think would have happened on any of the talking points we've had so far today. What would F1 look like had Vettel never been in it? And are you sad that Sebastian Vettel is possibly not going to be in our sport next year going forward? It's a big shock to us, to the system, for a lot of us, I think. And obviously a driver that's been around for so long now, it's kind of weird. It's going to be very weird to not see him on the grid. But yeah, that's it from me. Hope you have a lovely rest of your week, guys. Make sure you give a like, comment, and of course subscribe to the video. And I will see you guys in the next one.